They told me the last thing she saw was the headlights, a white star dragging the world into slow motion, and that she smiled anyway. I remember a different last thing, the weight of her hand in mine, the tiny tremor of the ring she'd refused to wear until the morning of the wedding, and the harmony of her breath against my shoulder, like someone humming a hymn I'd never learned. That memory is the only clean thing I have left. My name is Michael. 2 days ago, I was a man with a date circled on every calendar in the house, a chair reserved at my favorite bar, and a phone full of messages from relatives I pretended not to dread. I slept with the veil folded in a hatbox under our bed because she insisted it would bring luck to treat every tiny thing with ceremony. I folded it the same way tonight, with hands that do not remember how to be gentle. The accident was a crooked punctuation in a perfect sentence. They said she died before she hit the curve, as if that soft word could make the metal less sharp. They wrapped her in hospital linen and left her in a room that smelled of disinfectant and bleach, and always, that faint sweetness that clings to people who have been embalmed. I stood outside the room and listened to the monitor click like a metronome for a heart that the nurses had already placed in a chart. There was a moment when I tried to ask a question about miracles, and the nurse smiled like she was used to hearing prayers from the newly bereaved. I brought her home that night. The house had not yet learned how to be empty of her. Her coffee cup sat with a lipstick ghost on the rim. A book lay open at the page she'd been reading, a hairpin caught in the waistband of a dress. My fingers moved through these small relics as if I could learn the pattern of her life from how the ink curled or the way a single freckle trapped light. I placed her bouquet, lilies, white and stubborn, on the kitchen table. The stems were slick and heavy. The petals smelled like a chapel bench after rain. I remember thinking the lilies looked like they were still breathing. I thought the first night would dissolve the way people say grieving dissolves. A slow erosion, each day taking a scraper from the wall of you until you are no longer building things that hold light. Instead, the house answered me. At 2 a.m, something small tapped against the bedroom window. Not the heavy, insistent rap of a branch, but a soft, impatient knuckle. I froze, thinking of stray animals, of the sound of tires on wet asphalt. When I pulled back the curtain, there was nothing but the street lamp pouring a tired puddle of yellow. Still, the glass wore a smear, like a fingerprint left by a hand with long, thoughtful fingers. The next morning, the lilies were not where I had left them. They had been placed on the mantel, petals facing the portrait of us from the engagement shoot, the photograph where she is laughing and my jaw is too proud to be natural. The vase sat empty in the sink where I had washed it the night before. My hands began to shake, not with sorrow, but with the hot, small pulse of being watched. I told myself I had moved them in my sleep. I told myself I was losing time. I told myself many things. Objects shifted between rooms over the following days. A shoe beneath the sofa, a folded napkin in the freezer, the veil I had tucked neatly away, laid across the back of a chair with its lace stained as if someone had rested their cheek on it and fallen asleep. There were sounds, too. Not the kind that break glass or snap bone, but the quiet domestic sounds of a life insisting on continuing. The soft rustle of fabric when no one stands, a low humming that might have been a refrigerator, or might have been a lullaby from a radio that no longer exists. Once, I heard her footsteps on the stairs, the delicate staccato she used when she was trying not to wake me. I waited at the top of the stairs, breath held so tight it hurt, and the sound passed through the hallway and vanished into the drywall as if it had been nothing but a trick of memory. I started leaving the light on in the foyer, a small white beacon for the ghost I hoped I could call back to me. When I woke, I found the light extinguished and the front door ajar, a smear of dark on the threshold like the impression of a palm. Inside that smear were tiny granules, like the dried residue of mud. And when I leaned closer, there was a scent beneath everything else. Not perfume, not disinfectant, but the iron tang of something old, like coins forgotten at the bottom of a pocket. My stomach folded into itself, and something else rose up in me. A thing with the patient, foolish courage of a man who believes nothing can be worse than what already is. I started to talk aloud to her, to the shape of her I could not see. I told her the stupid things, the ordinary details of a life I had promised to share. The name I'd chosen for our first child, the way the ceiling in our bedroom had a crack that would become a map of our future arguments. I expected silence, the only honest answer left to me. Instead, the house answered back not with words, but with the careful rearrangement of my world. A note, a scrap torn from a wedding invitation, appeared under my pillow. It read only one thing in her handwriting: "Wait for me." The ink was smudged, as if whoever wrote it had trembled. I did not sleep after that. I sat in the dark and listened for breath that was not mine, for a presence that might circle the bed and stand at the foot of it like a benediction or a threat. The clock above the mantel clicked, and I wondered if time itself had agreed to be deceptive. I began to understand, with a slow, building certainty, that grief had not only hollowed me out, it had opened a door, and something on the other side of that doorway was patient enough to find the hinges. After the note, things stopped pretending to be accidents. I stopped leaving the front light on. I stopped pretending the taps running at night were the house remembering how to be alive. I stopped answering my phone because every ringtone sounded like the slow dragging of nails across a wooden box. I started looking for patterns. Patterns are the only currency a man like me can trade with when the world has taken all his certainties. The veil on the chair, the lilies on the mantel, the smear of mud like a palm on the threshold. Each small thing felt deliberate, like punctuation in a sentence someone else was writing with my life. On the third day, I found a photograph tucked inside one of her shoes. It was a picture I had never taken. Her face in profile, mouth relaxed, eyes closed as if sleeping. But there was a shadow at the edge of the frame, a dark smudge that crawled like ink toward her ear. I pressed the paper to my lips, because that's what grief does. It confuses touching with healing. When I turned the photograph over, there was a single word, written in a hand I recognized and did not. Remember. I began to haunt places we had never gone together. I sat in the church pew where we were supposed to be married and watched the light through the stained glass in the way she used to. I drove to the place of the crash and stood under the indifferent sky and listened to the way the highway laughed. People stared. Some people offered condolences like a bridge you can cross and forget. Nobody offered answers. Then I met someone who refused to be polite about the things that happen after a body stops answering. Her name was Marta, and she ran a tiny shop of broken things 2 blocks from the cemetery, a shop that smelled like cedar and old rain. I found her because the house, that careful conductor, had pushed my hand into the door of her shop. A teacup, a thimble, the veil's lace snagged on a nail. Marta looked at the veil, then at me, then at the lilies in my bag, and did not call me mad. That was the first mercy I felt in a long time. "You should not have brought her home," Marta said without greeting, the words like pebbles dropped into a pond. Dead things want to stay dead, or they want something else. She did not offer prayer or sympathy. She offered a name and a bargain. She showed me small, ritual things: a bowl carved from a single piece of wood, a length of black thread, a scrap of glass that caught light like a wink. She told me little rules in a voice that made my bones feel like soft wood. Do not call a name you do not own. Do not expect the face to be familiar when it comes back. Bring something she would refuse to live without. I laughed then, a sound like an animal caught in a trap. I told her I would give everything, my house, my job, anything, and she only shook her head. "Not things," she said. "Give me memory. Give me something she believed in when she still had teeth for the world." So I brought a photograph, a stray earring, the last voicemail she left, where she laughed at something private, and the laughter filled the phone like sunlight. I brought them wrapped in the lilies and the veil. Marta arranged them on a cloth that smelled faintly of smoke and something floral I could not name. She drew with the scrap of glass, not letters exactly, but a map of loops and sharp points, like a language trying and failing to be human. The night she worked, the house obliged. Winds came that had no business in a city that never slept, a breath through the keyhole, a low moan that made the nails on my forearms stand up. The lights flickered in time with Marta's chanting, a sound she made deep in her throat, not words I recognized, but syllables the floorboard answered. The lilies steamed in the bowl like lungs in winter. The veil lay across the sofa like a pale, patient mouth. When she finished, she told me to wait. She left me in the living room with a cup that tasted of copper and a smell in the air that was not my wife, but something she had loved, the aroma of the perfume she wore the day we said yes to forever. The house grew colder, as if someone had opened up a room and let out its memory. Around midnight, the television turned itself on with no remote, a white rectangle that threw a face across the room. Not a face I knew, but the static resolving itself into outlines that looked suspiciously like a mouth. Outside, someone or something scratched at the kitchen door, long, slow marks that traced the length of the wood. I walked toward the sound, and the lilies trembled as if with fever. My hands were steady. I had shed the luxury of shaking. I stood at the bedroom door and watched two shapes through the thin lamplight. Her body on the bed, pale and folded like a closed letter, and the veil lying over the armchair as if waiting for someone to put it on. For a moment, I thought the shape on the bed moved, a tiny shift, like a fish trying to remember water. But when I stepped closer, the ceiling clock chimed and the sound made my skin lift in plates. The first touch came not where I expected, but where the lilies lay on her chest. The petals twitched under the lace like moths testing a window. Heat rose from her, not the heat of life, but something nearer to fermentation or the slow electricity before a storm. Then the perfume in the room seemed to curl into words I did not understand, and the house inhaled as if through her. My name slid into that breath and into a place inside me that had forgotten how to be frightened. I do not know how long I stood there. Time broke into small, sensible pieces until it no longer made sense to call it time at all. When I finally moved, it was because something had shifted on the pillow beside her head, a crease as if a hand had been pressed there and then pulled away. I reached to smooth it, and my fingertips met something cold and wet. It was not what I expected. It was not a pulse. It was a ribbon of thin black seed, something that smelled like old coins and iron and wet soil. The sheet under it was damp in a way that made the world tilt. I understood then that what I had summoned did not arrive as a woman who would remember my jokes or our plans. It arrived with a grammar all its own. It had come to collect a debt. I could have walked away. I could have burned the veil, thrown the lilies into the river, called the police, and let others call it madness. Instead, I wrapped the ribbon around my finger and watched it coil, slow and patient, like a thing that had been waiting for me to be brave enough to tie myself to it. The house listened. The lilies inhaled. Outside, through the open door, the world held its breath. I could still feel her, a thin, ridiculous line that tied me to the person she had been. But in that breath of stale perfume and metallic air, something else took shape, a promise that if she came back, she would not be mine in any language I knew. I don't remember falling asleep that night. I only remember the sound, like fingernails on a coffin lid, steady, deliberate, tapping from the other side of silence. When I opened my eyes, the room was drenched in shadow, the kind that bends corners and makes every object look wrong, stretched, watching. The lilies by the bed had bloomed wide open, too wide, petals curling like mouths. The veil no longer rested on the chair. It was on her head. She stood in the doorway. I should have run. I should have screamed. But my chest locked, my lungs stopped, and all I could do was watch her shape fill the frame of the door. She wore her wedding dress, stained, frayed, dragging across the floor like it had been buried and unearthed again. The lace clung to her arms as if it had grown there, merging with her skin. Her face, God, her face, was pale but stretched in places, as if time had pulled at her from the inside. Her eyes were black hollows, deep enough to swallow the light. And yet, I knew it was her. I felt it. "Michael," she said. Her voice was wrong. It wasn't sound. It was vibration, a pulse in my bones, a whisper that traveled through the cracks in the walls and the veins in my skin. My name sounded like an echo underwater, but still, I wanted to believe. I reached for her. My hand shook, but I stretched it out anyway, like a fool begging for fire. She stepped closer, each movement stiff, unnatural, as if strings pulled her. The smell came first, not her perfume, not the sweetness of lilies, but a thick, metallic rot, the smell of soil freshly turned, of something old and wet beneath it. When she touched me, her hand was ice, fingers stiff, nails sharp enough to dig into my palm. But I let her hold me. I let her guide my hand to her chest. And for one insane second, I thought I felt it. A beat, faint, buried deep. A heart refusing to stay silent. "Do you remember?" she asked. I nodded, tears burning at the edges of my eyes. "Everything." Her head tilted. The veil slid slightly, revealing skin split at the jaw, lips torn but curling into a smile too wide. "Then you know what I want." I didn't answer. My mouth dried, words shriveled before they left. Her grip tightened, nails punctured my skin. Drops of blood welled and ran down our joined hands. She looked at it the way a starving person looks at bread, and in that instant, I understood. She hadn't come back for love. She hadn't come back for me. She came back because I had opened the door, and something wearing her dress, her veil, her face, had stepped through. The lilies on the bed shivered. The petals curled inward, bruising, darkening, until they collapsed into black sludge. The walls groaned. The house exhaled. And in that sound, I heard a chorus of whispers, thousands of them rising from beneath the floorboards. I pulled back, tried to break free, but she was stronger than me now. Her mouth stretched wider, jaw unhinging in a way no living thing could manage. Inside was no tongue, no teeth, just darkness, endless, deep. I screamed her name, not the thing she was now. Her name. And for a flicker, just one terrible flicker, I saw her, the woman I loved, staring back at me from inside those hollow eyes. Sad, begging. And then she was gone again, drowned by whatever had taken her place. I don't remember how long I fought. I don't remember the moment the lights died or when the world outside the windows stopped existing. What I do remember is the final thing she whispered before everything went dark. "You promised me forever." If you ever find yourself at a wedding and smell lilies where none should be, if you hear faint tapping on glass when you're alone, don't answer it. Don't open the door. Because I did. And now, I'm not sure if I'm still the groom, or if I became the offering.
Subscribe to Horror Story